Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The Inside Boxing Weekly show is brought to you by Power Plus Mouth Guards, MyBookie.ag, Replenishing Care and Technologies. Make sure you check all of them out at thegruelingtruth.net. I'm your host for the Inside Boxing Weekly show, Mike Goodpaster. And right now, I want to welcome in my co-host. First up, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm doing real well, Mike. Glad to be on. It's been a long layoff, but I'm here and ready to talk some boxing.
Yeah, hadn't been much going on. Either that or you just been ducking me. Next up, we got him fresh from the West Virginia Mountaineer, come from behind win yesterday. Our lawyer on staff, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Great to be here, Mike. Euphoric after West Virginia's comeback victory from 18 points down in the second half yesterday, and a lot of boxing action going on, and of course over this weekend, and plenty of news out there. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about.
All right, let's just go ahead and start off, recap the fights from yesterday. Bunch of boxing, bunch of action, some great fights, and of course, Sunday Lottery fought. First up, we'll talk a little Antonio DeMarco, who I didn't even know was still fighting, took on a young up-and-comer, Eddie Ramirez. DeMarco took him out in the first round, which, I don't know about you, but Jeremiah, but it shocked me that it was that easy.
Well, yeah, I didn't expect that. DeMarco at this point has become, just a guy he's just become a stepping stone for a lot of young prospects to move on to bigger and better things. And, I figured this was just another case. DeMarco's been he's been retired 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. And again, I just figured it'd be a stepping stone here, but he looked sharp, to be honest with you. His combinations were crisp. His hand speed was good. Maybe he's not as done as a lot of us think. He gave Figueroa Jr. a tough scrap, so it had him hurt late in the fight. So, maybe he's not done. Maybe he's got a little more left in the tank. I did think the stoppage was a little premature. Thought they could have, let it go on, see if maybe he would have recovered. But good win for DeMarco, and I'm sure he'll get a notable opponent soon.
Well, to me, John, it was more of, I don't think Eddie Ramirez is that great, number one. And number two, anybody can get caught with a shot in the first round. So I don't necessarily think DeMarco's got a lot left in the tank, but it was a good win for him.
I agree with both of you on this one. I thought going in that, I don't like these after-the-fight predictors. That was something I was going to talk about later on tonight. These people who they never put their we really don't do that on this show. But people who they never make picks before a fight, and then afterwards they knew everything that was going to happen. With that said, I did think going in that DeMarco had a shot. I'm not saying I was going to pick him over Ramirez, but I do agree with you, Mike, that and one of the reasons for that was I thought Ramirez was a decent prospect, but not a great prospect. I had seen him a few times. He did have a good win against Ryan Cowboy Carl, and he had a decent win against Watts, but he still wasn't a great prospect. But the part I agree with Jeremiah is, on this one, why I thought DeMarco had a shot was he did end up fighting well against Figueroa when it looked like he was done, and I did see some last night where he's built on that a little bit. I agree with Jeremiah where I do think it's a little bit of DeMarco, though, here, too. I don't think that he maybe is done as we thought. He lost to Bartholomew before that, who's tricky. He has been in with some tough guys. So I think he does have a little bit left in the tank, but I don't think Eddie Ramirez was a great prospect, and I don't think we'll see Eddie Ramirez reach the upper echelons, but I do also think the stoppage was quick.
All right, that brings us to the other 2 fights. They seem to be setting up a rematch between Cruz and Mares. Mares stopped Gutierrez in the 10th round. Avalos got stopped in the 8th round by Cruz. We're just going to combine these 2 because I didn't expect much out of either fight to begin with. I would rather just see these 2 go ahead and fight. What about you, John?
Oh, yeah, and I could probably touch on it now. It's another thing I wanted to touch on. I've been a big booster of PBC. I think that what they tried to do, was a great attempt, and unlike a lot of the naysayers, I think that they put pressure on everybody else in boxing to do things like now you have Top Rank on ESPN. You got Golden Boy then starting to try to make some better fights, things like that. HBO was under some pressure. But with that said, I think that they're pretty much done with the concept they tried. To put that on Fox last night, yeah, that may be good for Leo Santa Cruz to get a payday and Abner Mares to get a payday, and I respect both of those fighters. But Avalos doesn't really have anything much left from where he even was. And the Gutierrez guy, with all due respect, we know the courage it takes to get in the ring. Who were the 35 guys that Gutierrez beat to be 35-1-1? I mean, the guy, he didn't bring anything to the table. So that's what PBC gave us on national TV. That's just simply not going to work when all the fights end up on Showtime. Showtime just does not have the eyeballs. And I think that basically the concept seems to have put pressure on everybody else, but it's sputtering out. And I don't think we needed last night on Fox.
All right, Jeremiah.
Well, and not only that, I mean, not only do we not need to see that on TV, but we, with Heyman controlling most of the best fighters at 126, it's too drawn out of a process. I mean, Gary Russell Jr., who I think's performed really well since his loss to Lomachenko, he's just constantly playing second fiddle to Abner Mares, Leo Santa Cruz, Frampton. It's just unfortunate. I mean, for me, it's like when is Russell going to get his shot? I mean, now that we have to wait for a rematch between Mares and Leo Santa Cruz, well, that pushes the Frampton fight back, and I think a lot of us expected a third fight with Frampton to happen. So now, Gary Russell Jr. has to wait another year and a half to finally get a fight with one of these guys. It's just unfortunate. I mean, there are a lot of good fights to be made, and not only that, Mares and Santa Cruz really wasn't that close the first time. I mean, Santa Cruz won, in clear enough fashion for there not to be a demand for the rematch. So for me, it's just they got to get on it. I mean, there are just too many good fights to be made. The division is pretty loaded. Let's make the fights that the fans want to see.
All right, and then we had somehow Jamie Cox get a shot at the WBA Super World middleweight title against George Groves. Groves took him out in 4 rounds, I think pretty much the way everybody expected. Jeremiah, what was your take on Groves?
Well, I think Groves has made a transition from a fairly savvy boxer. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like he was, schooling guys, but I think he was more savvy in his prime. And I think he's had to transition into more of a puncher, and I think that's what we saw against Jamie Cox. I mean, Groves to me just doesn't – his defense looks like it's deteriorated a little bit, and again, he's relying more on his punch. And, Jamie Cox is inexperienced at the top level. I mean, I thought what I liked about Cox's approach was he went after Groves. It's not as if he didn't show up to fight. Groves was just a little too wily for him, and he landed a wonderful body shot. I love seeing body shot stoppages. I mean, it just doesn't happen enough. But, Groves took him out. He did what he had to do, and he sets up a rematch between not a rematch, but sets up a match with Chris Eubank Jr., and I think a lot of us are looking forward to that.
Yeah, I definitely would love to see that fight. What's your take on the Chris Eubank Jr. and George Groves fight, John?
I'm interested to commentate on that. I just want to back up 1 second as we move on. That one positive last night on the PBC on Fox is Robert Garcia has made a difference with Abner Mares. I think that's worthy of note. But getting to Cox and Groves, I think the negative on that is first you got to point out that while it's good that we're having a cruiserweight tournament and a 168-pound tournament, some of these early round fights are mismatches that are being justified by the tournament format. With that said, I've done a shift here. I was not particularly high on Chris Eubank Jr. I thought he was decent, but and I don't want to make too much out of the Yildirim win for the reasons I just talked about, the early rounds of these tournaments. But with that said, Eubank does do some good things. Or he's got an Americanized style where he had fought in the amateurs in the U.S. quite a bit. I kind of like what he does with that. I think he might be a little bit vulnerable defensively, but I do like the way his offense has developed, and I think that is going to give him an advantage, frankly, over some of the other Brits and Europeans, and I think that should be enough for him to get by George Groves. And maybe going into the tournament, I might not have looked at it that way, but I think now we have enough of a shift where Chris Eubank Jr. is going to have too much for George Groves with that style, and he may put some hurt on Groves.
All right, you agree with John, Jeremiah?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be close. I mean, I agree with John in the sense that Eubank Jr. does show some defensive liabilities, but his defense is tight enough. I mean, with his style, he's very offensive-minded, and, again, what I'd agree with John is that he's developed well. I mean, his hands are quick. I mean, the natural tools were there from the beginning, but I've noticed that he works behind his jab better. His combinations are a bit crisper. His accuracy is just ever slightly getting better and better. And that's one thing that I think is going to be tough for Groves to overcome is Groves' defense, I think, is worse than Eubank's at this point in time. And Eubank Jr., to his credit, he's also shown a good chin. I mean, I can't think of any fight that I've seen him in where he's been, granted he hasn't really fought a big banger, not a serious banger that I'm aware of, so I don't want to make too much of his chin, but it does seem like Chris Eubank Jr. has a good chin. And the fact that Groves has had to transition more into a puncher type. Again, he doesn't have one punch type power. Body shots typically do that for you, but, if you land them correctly. But I think it's a great matchup. I think it's about 60-40 in favor of Eubank at the moment. I like Eubank's work rate here. I don't think Eubank goes and rolls over Groves, but I think he does outwork him and maybe gets a stoppage late.
Yeah, I think the fight's a 50-50, just because really I'm not sold on either one. I do see where Eubank has the potential. I think Groves has fought against a better competition, but in his two biggest fights, he did kind of run out of gas too. So I would like to see it. I think it would clarify some stuff for us.
Yeah, I mean, he boxed well against Froch. I mean, we got to admit, I mean, that Froch, in the first fight against Froch, Groves was, he was holding his own. I mean, most people thought that Groves was winning that fight up until what most people thought was a quick stoppage. So, I mean, the guy's good. He's been at the top level for a while, but, not only is this intriguing in the sense that we have a tournament format where we'll have Groves, versus, Eubank Jr., and then maybe in the finale we might have Callum Smith versus, the winner of those two, but the potential winner there, because, the Brits are the favorites here, the winner of the tournament could possibly take on James DeGale. I mean, there are a lot of big domestic fights on the British scene in that division right now.
All right, that will take us to the Barclays Center, Brooklyn, New York, last night. The main event was Arizonde Lara and Terrell Gausha. Did I get that right, Jeremiah?
Gausha.
Yeah, good enough. His name's Gausha, because the fight was crap. We're going to talk about that one first because it was really boring. I thought the other two fights, the one was a quick knockout, and Trout Hurd was a great fight. But Lara, what was your opinion on Lara last night, John?
I'm not a huge fan of Arizonde Lara, and he's almost like a lightning rod now in the sport, because you have some backers of his who say that anybody doesn't like to watch him fight. You just don't appreciate boxing.
Well, then I don't appreciate boxing, John.
Yeah, and I don't buy that. And part of what I thought, I have not seen this before, and I was encouraged a bit by it last night, where despite the fact that they were telecasting that, I thought the Showtime commentators did a better job last night of alluding to some of that when they other commentators, including, of course, Showtime's, who have broadcasted Lara before, and, he's been on HBO, had not mentioned that, where, the guy, even when he fought a guy like Ishe Smith, and, they had it wide on the scorecards, Lara wasn't throwing many punches to me. You just see that in lots of his fights. He's very cautious against, Canelo Alvarez, and, of course, Canelo Alvarez can hurt you, so we understand that, but the fact is he was still cautious and not throwing punches. And what frustrates you about him doing that is that I think, unlike a lot of guys that are slick boxers, I think Lara can punch hard with the left hand. He hurts people with it. He just chooses not to fight that way. I agree with what they said last night, and seeing that fight, I mean, he was in a great war with Angulo, and he showed a lot of heart and a lot of power, and it was such a brutal fight that you almost can't blame him for being a little gun-shy, but he just doesn't do enough in his fights. There's just too many rounds where he's not doing anything. It's not slick boxing. He's not doing anything. And that's where some of his backers, I think, are a little bit delusional. There's just too many rounds in fights where Erislandy Lara doesn't do anything. And, Terrell Gaucher had, he had a good amateur background in the U.S., but he turned pro late. His performances were not exciting. He's not a puncher. I think Al Heyman does take care of his fighters, and he was getting Gaucher a decent payday for him against Lara and letting Lara do his thing as a main event fighter. But that's the problem that we've gotten into lately with PBC that we didn't always have in the beginning with it. And why I think they've got some problems now is, what does that do for the fans? I mean, fans were booing, walking out. There was all kinds of empty seats for the main event, and that just doesn't do anything for boxing. I mean, maybe he's taking care of his fighters, but it's got to be a situation where he's taking care of his fighters and the fans are benefiting at the same time.
All right, I don't really have a second question about that fight because I had a hard enough time coming up with one, Jeremiah. So I'm going to do this. We're going to transition. I'm going to let you both talk about this a little bit. But we had Jermell Charlo, first-round knockout over Erickson Lubin, which I know you liked Lubin a lot coming in as Jeremiah, so I know that had to surprise you a little bit. But my question going forward is, I want to see Charlo and Lara.
Yeah, well,
that's a statement, not a question, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what the whole card was designed to be. It was designed to bring this all together and call for unfortunately, unification of a bunch of trinkets. I mean, Lubin. In fact, I actually saw Lara calling Lubin and Charlo out on Twitter today, and I thought that was a good sign. I mean, even though at first I thought maybe it'd be a little difficult to make because I thought that Jermell was still with Ronnie Shields, but when I dug a little deeper, apparently Jermell started his own gym, even though Jermall still trains with Ronnie Shields. So there shouldn't be a big issue making that fight happen, and the fact that they're so familiar with each other stylistically because they've sparred many rounds together, I think it's a damn good fight. I mean, the thing about Lara is if you don't make him work, he's going to take an he's going to work the right hand and try to bait you into running into a left. He's going
but Charlo's going to make him work.
Exactly, but that's what I find intriguing, because even though the Charlos have both looked really good, and Lara has not been flattering fans lately, I've got to keep in perspective that Austin Trout did give Charlo a damn tough time, and Lara is certainly superior to Trout in just about every facet of the game, in my opinion.
Plus Lara's just experience compared to Charlo.
Exactly. Well, I mean, if you think about it, Lara is arguably undefeated. I mean, you could potentially make that case. I mean, Lara he's a really good fighter. It's just who he's been fighting lately and his performances. But again, you get Charlo versus Lara. It's a really good fight. It's one that should be made. Let's do it. I do have a little fear, though, that fight might be a bit boring, too. That's just a fear. I think because the stylistic, because they're familiar with each other, there might be some hesitancy. That's not what I'm hoping for, but that's what could potentially happen.
All right, John, what's your take on a potential Lara Charlo fight?
I like what Jermell Charlo's been doing lately. He joined with Derek James, Errol Spence's trainer, and I do see differences in him with Derek James, and I see differences in Morris with Robert Garcia. A lot of times most times the trainer switches are overrated. That's why I'm pointing those two out, because with those two, I'm seeing some differences. Obviously, Jermell Charlo is punching harder because he was not, when he was with Ronnie Shields, punching like he has been with James. Now, part of that's opposition. I was not that high on Lubin. I wasn't completely down on him either, but I felt he was kind of up and down. And I did say on our show a while back that I did not think he was going to have enough for Jermell Charlo. I didn't think he'd get stopped in the first round, admittedly, but I didn't think that was going to be too good for him. But getting to Lara and Charlo, I have the fear that Jeremiah has with that one. I think at that level of opposition, I believe Jermell Charlo will revert back more to the boxer Jermell Charlo. But I think that the offense he's been bringing lately and Lara's caution, even though that will be a chess match, he might have enough to take a decision from Lara. I myself would prefer Jarrett Hurd and Lara because Jarrett Hurd will come at, he's got the size, he will come at you hard, he'll walk you down. I still think his boxing ability is underrated. I think Jarrett Hurd's a guy that can fight the way he wants to fight, depending who he's fighting. And I would like to see Jarrett Hurd coming after Lara, trying to put some hurt on him, make Lara start having to throw that big left for survival because he's got a guy really trying to take his head off, and I think that would be very interesting. But I think
yeah,
Hurd
and I agree with you, but I also think they're going to give Charlo the first shot just because of what you just said.
Yeah, and I'm not saying they won't. We're going to hear. You think it'll be one of those two guys against Lara. We're going to see which, and it may very well be Charlo, which I don't think will be as an exciting fight, but I also think that Charlo's got a chance to beat Lara as well. But I think that one, because of the styles, might just be a tighter chess match.
All right, and that brings us to the highlight of the evening, I thought at least. That was Jarrett Hurd, 10th round TKO stoppage over Austin Trout. I think it was at the end of the round there. John, we'll start with you. I mean, that was a hell of a fight, and I think it answered some questions about Hurd. And Austin Trout still got a little bit left.
Oh, yeah, and Hurd's one of my favorite fighters in boxing. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I've been high on him for a while. It's his 7th straight knockout. There's things I like about the guy talent-wise. There's things I like about the guy intangible-wise. And, there's certain people in the sport over the years that you learn a lot from. And I always, reading interviews with Emmanuel Stewart, of course, is one. And then Gil Clancy as well, when you would hear him commentate. Why I'm getting back to that is Gil Clancy would always say, you look at the version of a guy that has showed up against somebody sometimes. And why I point that out for this fight is exactly, what you were pointing out, Mike. I mean, this was a top-notch Austin Trout that showed up last night. And Trout's always been good to me, being very difficult, one of the most difficult guys to fight in the sport. But, he came to win, he came to fight, and, that was the best version, even after a 17-month layoff. That was the best version of Austin Trout that could show up at this point, and he fought like it, and he gave Jarrett Hurd all he could handle. And as you said, it did enable us to get some questions answered about Jarrett Hurd. Even if you think you see some flaws in Hurd, and that they did allude to last night, I think it's correct. He does not have a big amateur background, but he's just that good that he's a guy that he's going to have a lot of upside because he does not have the great amateur background, and he's as good as he is, despite the flaws he shows. I would go as far as to, this is just my feeling, and I do feel it, I think he's a threat to beat anybody at 154 and 160. He's just got different things he can do. He's got size for those weight classes. He punches hard enough. He's improving all the time. And, Trout's not a big puncher, but he looks like he takes a good shot. He fought through the cut last night, which he got from a butt. He didn't panic. I just think Hurd's just a guy on the upswing that's going to be tough for anybody to handle. So
you think he could beat Triple G?
I think at this stage I would go that far. I think that he would be a threat to beat Golovkin. I mean, Golovkin's turning 36 years old. He takes a lot of shots. Hurd's 6 feet tall. I mean, Canelo Alvarez is 5'9". This is a 6-foot guy. It's at 154 pounds against lesser opposition, but Golovkin's opposition, before getting in with, Jacobs and Alvarez was not anything to get excited about either. I'm not going to say it's a certainty or something like that, but I think Hurd has that kind of ability. And at this point where you look at, where Golovkin is, and even for Canelo Alvarez, Canelo Alvarez, who I like a lot, he's 5'9", though. Hurd's a young guy with that kind of size who can do some different things. He can hurt you with one punch with that uppercut. Again, I'm not going to say he's an automatic to beat these guys, but I don't have any fear about Hurd being in there competing with anybody despite his relative lack of experience because he's got 21 pro fights and he didn't have much of an amateur career.
All right, Jeremiah.
Well, I think it was a damn good fucking fight. I mean, Trout, to his credit, did really good in the early going. I mean, he was moving his feet well. He was crafty. He was spinning Hurd. He was, out jabbing him, going to the body a lot. And I actually thought if he was going to extend the fight, because he was spending a lot of energy in the early going, and I figured, well, if he wants to even things up, keep going to the body. And he kept trying, but it just wasn't enough. And in fact, I think something to point out about Hurd is he's almost got that I saw somebody say it, but he's almost got like an Antonio Margarito thing going on where he'll take what you have, to land a shot of his own. I mean, he took a bunch of good hard punches, and never once did he look flustered. I mean, it looked like he was slightly bothered at times, but never. And again, we admit that Trout is not a big puncher, but he's a good puncher. He's not somebody you want to get clipped by cleanly over and over again. But Hurd kept taking it, and I think that's what makes him a threat to a lot of guys too. He's just a tough guy. He's got good size, but I got to give Trout a lot of effort. I mean, a lot of credit. He had a long layoff. Right, he comes back. He finally gets a shot at somebody good. He takes it and he performs admirably. So I hope he gets another good fight in his future. And Hurd, we were talking about Lara versus Charlo, and I think that's a damn good fight. I think it should be made. But I also think that Charlo versus Hurd would be an excellent fight as well. I'd love to see that.
All right, and of course, last night on the Showtime, they had Errol Spence, they had Keith Thurman. I know everybody wants to see that fight. It was announced that Errol Spence will defend his IBF World Welterweight title on January 13th against Lamont Peterson at a still-to-be-determined location. Now, I brought this up first, even though I just had a little thing pop up that said Conor McGregor may be fighting Jeff Horn. I'm just going to ignore that. Jeremiah, what's your take on possibly Peterson-Spence?
Well, I was hoping that it would happen this year. I mean, Peterson was in the running. We knew that. Peterson was a Heyman guy. So I'm not surprised by the choice of opponent. I'm just surprised by the choice of the date. I mean, I don't think there was any good reason why Spence couldn't have gotten a fight this year, and then fought early next year, like most guys do. This is a lot of these guys do the same thing over and over again, where they'll fight early in the year, late in the year, and we only get 2 fights, unfortunately, and it's something that plagues boxing. But, the thing about Peterson is that he just kind of seems like he's caught, in a world of 2 styles. It's like sometimes he'll choose to brawl, which he's done a number of times, especially lately, or he'll choose to box, and he's good at both. The problem is he's not a big puncher. I mean, he's a strong guy. He's well-rounded. He's got a good chin. Not great, but, and I think he's going to give Spence a competitive fight. I mean, I think, Peterson is good enough to do that, but I just don't think he's strong enough to, or he hits hard enough to keep Spence off of him, and he probably gets worn down and taken out late in the fight.
All right, John.
Yeah, I like Lamont Peterson. He's a good fighter. There's just certain matchups sometimes where I just don't see how a guy can win or even be that competitive. And for me, this is one of those with Lamont Peterson. And it's not any disrespect to him as a fighter. It's just I have thought that much of Errol Spence for a few years, and of course I still do, and more than ever after the Brook fight. And Lamont Peterson's not a puncher. Matisse is a big puncher, but he got blown out by Matisse. And why I just referenced that is, you can have a bad night, and boxing's a tough sport. But with Errol Spence, the way he punches at 147 pounds, with the skill he brings along with his punching power, I just don't see what Lamont Peterson can do. And I think this one might not go that long because Peterson can't hold him off. He's not going to outbox him. And, Spence is a bigger guy physically, stronger guy physically. And now Spence has had enough of a layoff off the Brook fight without laying off too long that, he should be rested. And charged back up. So, and I agree with what Jeremiah said. With what we know about the dangers, more than ever, you can't have fighters fighting too much like you did in the old days, but we really probably need 3 fights a year out of these top fighters, and we're lucky now if we're getting 2. And when then they want to give us setup fights, in other words, not the best matchups possible, it just takes too long to play out. I mean, for me, I'm not disrespecting Lamont Peterson, but I don't need Spence Lamont Peterson. I don't need to see that. He's already taken out Kell Brook. Thurman's on the shelf, but Sean Porter's going to fight Granados. I mean, who did anybody ask for Porter Granados?
I did, John. I asked like 3 or 4 people. I got it, so you're just jealous.
He made the call.
I made the call.
And they gave it to you. I didn't know that there was a lot of.
Hey, it's better than seeing Adrian Broner fight either one of them.
Yeah, it's just and look, I thought PBC was on the right track for a while. Now they're not that they didn't have missteps, and I think they put pressure on everybody else, but now they're falling back into the same old business model, which we all know does not work. That's where boxing's popularity slipped, even though we're having a great year. Within the great year, there's still too many signs of business as usual creeping back in, especially if PBC now is not going to be putting pressure on the other entities by what they're putting on. And then we'll really just be back to where we were 3 years ago.
Well, my opinion of this fight is this. We obviously know that they want Thurman to fight Spence. So I think that we're real lucky we get something as competitive as Spence and Peterson instead of Spence and a guy that doesn't even deserve a chance. Because they could have gave him a lot easier opponent than Lamont Peterson even to wait for this fight.
Well, I agree with that, Mike. If you, in a sense, it could be argued that it's somewhat old school where, for me, he barely missed it. But I would say most, even if you were ranking it on original 8, Lamont Peterson could be a number 10. So, in other words, that's kind of almost your fairness test.
Yeah, and my problem with Peterson is this. I thought against Evan Nation, he actually hit harder. I was at the fight. I mean, he was thumping Evan Nation. Evan Nation is a tough guy, but my problem is this. He will have only fought once this year, too, and he hadn't fought since 2015. So, I mean, hell, he's only fought one time in the last 3 years.
Yeah,
he fought Diaz, but he had a lot of trouble with Diaz. I thought Peterson did win that fight, but boy, he maybe won it by one round. In other words, going his way instead of going the other way. And Diaz was not able to compete with Crawford, so that's a bad sign to me there as well.
Well, and a bad sign, to add to this is. They were talking to Spence and they were talking to Thurman, and you could see, that's what they're trying to get at. That's what they're trying to hype, and rightfully so. I mean, that's a fight we should all want to see. I mean, I think in most people's opinion right now, those are the 1 and 2 guys at 147. But Thurman, he was long-winded unnecessarily so. I mean,
he doesn't seem like he wants to even fight anybody right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he went to India, and I don't know if he had, some sort of religious experience, and he's just not into the violence thing anymore, or what. But it was just kind of a weird interview. I didn't really like the way it was going. But
he really didn't look like he wanted to fight anybody.
No, and wasn't he talking about kids or something, like having kids? I'm like, what are you talking about, man?
I don't know. He was all over the place. It was kind of like listening to Donald Trump talk. Yeah,
but I was hoping, that. He would just say, hey, let me fight Spence. That's a fight people want to see, because before all this, I mean, Keith Thurman was talking about people running from him, guys like Mayweather and whatnot, and, he's fighting. To his credit, he fought Porter, and he fought, Danny Garcia, and those were really good wins. And, we're all hoping that Errol Spence is on the menu, but it looks, and I'm hoping that they make it. I'm hoping that they just get the Peterson fight over with. Keith Thurman seems to know that he's not getting a real stiff test in his next fight, and then late next year, I wish it was just mid next year, but then we can get that fight, and we can all be happy. I mean, that's something that's got to happen. I mean, that is something that would crown, a new champion, not this trinket nonsense. So let's make it happen.
Yeah, and John talked a little bit earlier about Porter and Granados. And I don't understand that, just because to me Granados is a junior welterweight, and you're going to throw him against a welterweight that can crack a little bit. And I don't see how this turns out anything other than bad for Granados, John.
Yeah, I don't think Granados wins it. It's just a question if he goes the distance or not. Porter.
Yeah, and I think this. I mean, if he is big enough to hang with Porter, it'll be a hell of a fight. He just didn't have enough firepower.
Right. It's not going to. It's one of those fights that the way Porter fights and the way Granados fights, it could be reasonably entertaining, but you just don't see Granados winning the fight, and we're just again waiting for better fights. Now that we've had Canelo and Triple G, you could argue, if you're not counting the rematch, I mean, you could at least make an argument that Thurman Spence is the fight we most need to see in boxing. So let's get that on now. Now, if Thurman really does, if his elbow injury really is that bad, and it may be, then he just can't fight. So that's unfortunate, but.
I also think, as he said, it's going to be a year till they can fight anyways, just because of that.
Yeah, and but there was people that took it the same way that you guys did. That people. I mean, we're hearing some rumors that there did seem to be kind of this buzz, like, does Thurman still want to keep fighting right now? So that's not good. That's arguably the biggest fight we could have out there. That's not a rematch. That fight needs to take place as quickly as possible, and especially for PBC. We've had the thing now with Wilder's opponents falling out, and they've got to keep some of their momentum. They had the Hurd Trout fight was excellent last night. Charlo did what certainly he was supposed to do last night. Even though it was a one-rounder, you're not going to fault him for that. Of course, Lara Goucher is what we thought we were going to get, but PBC's got to put some good stuff out there. And
I can tell you this, John. I would rather see Crawford and Spence than I would Thurman and Spence.
Yeah, you could make an argument for that. Either of those two would be excellent. They would be two of the top fights that could be made in boxing. But Top Rank already looks like they've got Crawford on their plan. They're going to have Horn fight a Patsy, and then they're going to sacrifice Crawford. And I've heard that rumor too. I have heard that.
Yeah, it popped up on here that if he beats the dude he's fighting in December, the next up could be Conor McGregor, which I think would be great. Horn can make a lot of money, and then Conor McGregor will shut up once and for all, because I don't think he's going to be able to walk up and punch Horn. Horn hits a lot harder than Mayweather. He's not Mayweather as a boxer, but I think Horn would take him out fairly easily.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it seems like Jeff Horn's people have been talking that kind of stuff ever since the Pacquiao fight. I mean,
well, no, what I just saw was the McGregor people talking it.
Yeah, I don't think. Well, I really don't think so. I mean, I've also been hearing that McGregor and Malignaggi might actually fight, but for me, it's just a lot of talk. I mean, really, Dana White needs Conor McGregor in the UFC. I mean, John Jones. You know
what? I'd rather see Conor McGregor fight Deontay Wilder than I would, the dude that's going to fight him.
Stavern, yeah. Well, nobody
I forgot his damn name, and I've seen him fight like 20 times.
Yeah. I'm a Wilder.
But yeah, I would rather see Conor McGregor fight him.
Nobody wants Wilder Stavern too, including me as a fan.
Including Wilder and probably Stavern too.
Yeah. Yes, there was a rumor this morning that Stavern God kicked himself. Maybe have to second thoughts about it, but we'll see. I guess.
To me, Kubrat Pulev is more interesting as Anthony Joshua than this crap.
Let's not get carried away, Mike.
I'm not. I'd rather see Pulev.
I don't want to see Pulev, but he's legitimate top 10, and Stavern is not right now. So I'll give.
That's what I mean. I mean, Pulev, the only time he's had his ass whooped was against a Klitschko, and that's 9 out of about all the damn heavyweights have been like that. Right. Hell, I'd better see Jarrell Big Baby Miller get a shot, or Dillian White.
Well, everybody would like to see Big Baby get the shot. I don't think people want Big Baby. I think that's the problem.
Hell, I'd rather see Andy Ruiz get the shot.
But I hope Big Baby with this HBO deal that's going to help him get some of these fights. That's one of the better developments I've seen in boxing lately. Is that with this HBO deal with Jacobs and Miller, I think that those were good guys for HBO to target to do what they did. I thought it was some kind of savvy behind-the-scenes moves by HBO showed me that they were thinking. I think picking up those two guys was a good move.
All right, John, did you have any more news you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. I did slip in a couple of the things I wanted to talk about. There's I touched on the PBC. There was the haters from the beginning, and I like what they're trying to do. I still think I give Heyman credit for trying it, but I think they changed things. I think they put pressure on everybody else. But with that understood, I think the haters can rejoice, and it's probably done in terms of what they were trying to do. It's just back to business as usual from 3 years ago or so. I think we've got chaos with the PEDs and trying to determine who the real champs and the ratings are. We've already, and Jeremiah's on the transnational board, so he can probably add something to that. But you've got problems as it is, and now you throw in guys getting suspended for PEDs who could be, title holders like, Neri at bantamweight, and even though he was not the transnational champ, but he was with the ring, and they stripped him, and I can't blame him for that. But then you've got guys in the ratings like Ortiz, who Ortiz should fall out of the ratings, but it's just completely chaotic. So any ideas out there on how that should be handled should be discussed among all the fans and the boxing intelligentsia, because that's just complete chaos right now. And despite the great year we're having, I'll certainly say that. We got Canelo and Triple G, the best fight that could have been made in boxing. Let's unfortunately add, we can look at the live gate and how much they made and try to make ourselves feel better, but we had the best fight we could make in boxing, and it didn't really make a blip on the radar of the general public. And it was a good fight. It was a great fight. And, I think we need to take a look at that. If that's the best fight we could make in boxing, and it was, and it was a good fight, and it doesn't register, that's not good for the long term.
Well, and I think part of that's because the approach that they used to market the fight. I mean, I think, again, this is what I said in the build-up to the fight. Is I was hoping that the fight would go to a stadium, somewhere like Dallas, where tens of thousands of people could pay for a ticket, view the fight, and I just feel like the publicity would be a bit better. It's just a bit warmer to the fans themselves. Like, hey, let's help the poor folks out. Let them, let them come watch a great fight. But instead, like Oscar De La Hoya is proving, I mean, this is just been one of the unfortunate things in boxing, is that De La Hoya, when he first came into boxing, he's making it sound like he's going to change things. He's not going to continue the status quo, and he's going to do this and he's going to do that. But over time, he's talking crap about Mayweather and some of his matchup choices, but he's doing the same thing with Saul Alvarez. He's got all sorts of other issues. It's just unfortunate. I mean, I think they could have marketed the fight a lot better. But you're right. It didn't make the kind of impact that it should have. I mean, besides the judging, it just, I actually felt as if the talk about McGregor-Mayweather lingered on a little bit longer than Alvarez-Golovkin.
Yeah, that was a danger. I think that was a danger going in, and in hindsight, in effect, it may have sucked some of the life out of it.
Yeah, so it was bad for boxing, you'll admit.
I would have said that I think. Well, let's be fair to Oscar. I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Oscar did schedule that for the Mexican Independence Day weekend before Mayweather and McGregor was scheduled. Correct. So I guess we can't necessarily. Well, then it becomes a chicken game. In other words, when Mayweather and McGregor was a go, should Oscar have moved it? Tough call, but yeah, I mean, I don't think overall it was necessarily bad for boxing, but it probably did prove to be bad for Canelo and Triple G. I think I'll concur in that.
Which, since it was the biggest fight of the year that could be made in boxing, I think that makes it bad for boxing.
Well, I think then you just got to measure what eyeballs Mayweather-McGregor brought in terms of new fans watching boxing that wouldn't have been watching it, and then you've got to compute that with how many fans did you lose that might have watched Canelo.
Well, I don't think you lost any fans because most boxing fans didn't watch it, but I don't think you also added any MMA fans that are not boxing fans. I mean, watching a pillow fight between two grown men is not that exciting.
Yeah, you might have added a few, but it's hard to say. I mean, I would have
a couple
thought,
grown women that may get people might watch that.
I mean,
Jeremiah would watch that.
Well, I mean, what the rumors are that the Canelo Triple G pay-per-view numbers in the U.S. ended up being about 1.5. Isn't that right? Did you guys hear the same thing?
That's what I ended up hearing. But you could tell that it was lower than what they anticipated because they weren't jumping for joy. I didn't. It's just like McGregor and Mayweather, where you heard, there were rumors put out, hyperbolic rumors put out before the actual numbers were there. But yeah, I mean, both of them didn't do as expected. I mean, I think Mayweather-McGregor was supposed to do about 0.4 million more than Pacquiao-Mayweather, and it ended up beating that either. So I guess in a way, there was some disappointment on both sides.
Yeah, and the live gates were giving tickets away for Mayweather-McGregor.
Yeah, I think both. I think Jeremiah's right there. I'd say I would have, and following those numbers, I thought it was realistic. You would have hoped that Canelo and Triple G would have had a shot at 2 million based on the past, and that's probably wouldn't have been crazy. It would have been a huge hit. And then same thing, Mayweather-McGregor did end up being maybe 400,000 less or so than they projected it to be. It did not end up beating out Pacquiao and Mayweather, and even Espinosa and Showtime have confirmed that. So that's just a fact. So both ended up being slightly disappointing in their performance.
All right, guys. Jeremiah, do you have anything else you wanted to bring up before we get off here?
Any final words? Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things going on in the sport, and it's unfortunate because, especially with the Deontay Wilder thing, a lot of us have been expecting him to step his game up, and he's been trying. Unfortunately, his opponents just haven't been they haven't been keeping themselves clean. So we're not getting that. But I did want to say that I'm a little disappointed in Miguel Cotto's final choice of opponent. I want to say that it's just more of the same from Bob Arum. It's just him pairing Cotto up with a top-ranked guy who's really not much of a threat to Cotto. He's chinny. He's a good fighter. I mean, he's got slick boxing skills. He's quick. But he was stopped by Jesse Vargas, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's just kind of a letdown. It's 2 in a row, and I'm not loving it. But then again, I've got to say that, for guys like Pacquiao and Cotto and others who put in their time, I can't.
If it's his last fight, Jeremiah, I can understand it. If it's not, it's bad.
Golden Boy's got both of them. Golden Boy's got Saddam Ali, and they got Cotto now as well.
Yeah, but like I said, if it's Cotto's last fight, I got no problem giving him a cupcake. He goes out and he leaves.
Mike, it's Cotto's last fight just because he's fighting Saddam Ali, and then he'll have a fight signed for 6 months later against somebody who's a bigger payday. So, this is just garbage. Nobody needs Saddam Ali and Cotto, even though I totally respect Cotto as a fighter, like you both do, and what he's done for the sport. But if he's going to keep fighting, I don't know. This would be the type of thing where you got to harken back to this is where George Foreman's blueprint was nice. If we don't really have this platform, you do with PBC and that Top Rank, but if he was going to fight Saddam Ali and it was going to be on ESPN or Fox Network or something like that, fine. But don't give me my HBO subscription. Don't give me Cotto and Saddam Ali.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. I want to remind everybody to check out our sponsors, MyBookie.ag, Power Plus Mouthguards, Replenishing Care, and Technologies. You can find all those on the grillingtruth.net. You can follow us Twitter @GrillingTruth. You can hear all of our shows on iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn. Anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grilling Truth. So for Jeremiah Preisser, John Einreinhofer, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grilling Truth, where the legends